Crisis on Infinite Earths. DC Animated is coming out with a new series of movies. It was done in the Arrowverse, but it all began in the comic books in 1985. We're going to take a deep dive into Crisis on Infinite Earths, starting with issue number 1 on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hey there, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. Please like, comment, subscribe, do all that great stuff. I'm going to do a series of videos concentrating on the 1985-86 DC Maxi series Crisis on Infinite Earths, a 12-issue series that attempted to, at the time, simplify DC Comics continuity. It was left in charge of the writer-artist team of Marv Wolfman and George Perez, who had just a couple of years earlier begun a very successful run on New Teen Titans, probably the most popular comic book DC was publishing at the time. And so they were tasked with creating a story that would encompass essentially the entirety of DC Comics history and simplify it to make it more accessible to new readers going forward. And it was also to mark the 50th anniversary of DC Comics. DC Comics began in 1935 and, of course, reached prominence in 1938 with the publication of Action Comics #1, the first appearance of Superman, and the burgeoning of superheroes. Well, DC, and we'll talk about this when we look at the book. We're going to go basically page by page in the series, starting with this issue, issue number 1. And we're going to talk about all of the principal characters that we're looking at in here and give you a primer of those characters up until that time. We're not going to really go into the characters' histories in the last 39 years, but we're going to talk about where they were at that point. And one of the things to remember is that this was a series very much of its time. The characters were largely used characters being published in DC Comics at the time, with especially the main characters, but also taking into account the breadth of DC's continuity, as well as all of the characters from publishers DC had acquired up until that time. Quality Comics, Fawcett Comics, and Charlton Comics. They've continued to do that by getting Wildstorm Properties, The Authority, etc. But that's for another day. Let's talk about where these characters came from and what we're seeing on the page for the first time. I remember reading this series when I guess it came out when I was in college. And it was revelatory because I was really into DC history at the time. I knew the vast majority of the characters that they referenced, but some were a little bit of head scratchers and some were brand new infusions. So let's take a look at the book. We're going to start with the cover here. This first issue, Spectacular Crisis on Infinite Earths, this great cover by George Perez. Issue number 1, April 1985. And all of the characters depicted on the cover are going to be in the book. So I'm not going to talk about any of the particular characters just yet. But one of the things when you first looked at the book, you didn't realize that it is a front and back cover. You get an entire image by George Perez of all these characters and all of the Infinite Earths going back. Really, we focus on, by story's end, 5 Earths, but there are about 4 that are included in this particular story. So let's take a look at page 1. In the beginning, there was only one, a single black infinitude, and then the instant a multiverse was born. A multiverse of worlds vibrating and replicating, and a multiverse that should have been one became many. So they're kind of indicating that this was a mistake. But we see all of these parallel Earths going on. So we're introduced to this spectacle and this character that we've never seen before. This right here is the first appearance of the character known as Pariah, of course created by Marv Wolfman and George Perez for this very comic book. We're introduced to this idea of Infinite Earths. The idea of Infinite Earths was introduced in Flash, number 123, September of 1961. The concept by Gardner Fox. and Carmine Infantino. It basically, so the whole background, the entire background of this is starting with that book, and we'll get into in just a moment the history that spawned from that. This is 1961. DC had stopped publishing most of their superhero titles in the early 1950s. The handful that continued were Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superboy, who was Superman as a boy. All had their own individual titles, and then you did have the anthology titles, Adventure Comics, which headlined Superboy, Action Comics headlined Superman, Detective Comics headlined Batman, and World's Finest Comics headlined Superman and Batman. So those characters, along with backups Aquaman and Green Arrow, those were the only heroes to be continuously published. So in 1956, when DC kind of, I think, largely because of the success of the Adventures of Superman television series, decided to reboot some superheroes under the guidance of Julius Schwartz, more with a concentration on science fiction backgrounds, starting with Barry Allen's Flash, Hal Jordan's Green Lantern, Ray Palmer's Atom, the Thanagarian Hawkman. And that's the Silver Age of comics. So Barry Allen's Flash, in his own book in Flash 123, encounters the original Golden Age Flash, Jay Garrick, and it's explained that Earth 1 contains the characters that readers at the time were reading right then. Justice League of America, Barry Allen Flash, Hal Jordan Green Lantern, Superman, Batman, etc. Earth 2 was the home to the characters from DC's Golden Age, and that was expanded upon to include the Justice Society of America and other characters. And we'll talk about that as we go along, as it has prominence. So anyway, in 1963, in Justice League of America 21, DC started publishing annual team-ups between the Justice League of America and the Justice Society of America. Usually the Crisis On. So it was the Crisis on Earth 1, the Crisis on Earth 2. The second annual meeting is what we're going to see here on the next page, which is the Crisis on Earth 3. And we're told this is Earth 3. Its universe is about to reach the end of existence. We see Power Ring and Ultraman. They're two members of the Crime Syndicate of America. Again, they were introduced in Justice League of America 29 in 1964, created by Gardner Fox and Mike Sekowsky. A two-part story that included Justice League of America 30. These characters were evil counterparts on this Earth 3. Earth 3, everything was backwards. Christopher Columbus discovered Europe. President John Wilkes Booth was assassinated by Abraham Lincoln. And the villains have taken control of the Earth. They're the only ones with superpowers. And in the story, because everything is opposite, Ultraman, the Kryptonian, the Superman character, gains powers whenever he's exposed to kryptonite. And the power that he gains is the power to see into other universes. He sees, look at these. We got these heroes on Earth 1 and Earth 2, and they're going to give us the ability to conquer those Earths. It'll be a challenge that we're missing. Power Ring is obviously a counterpart of Green Lantern. And as we move on, we see Owlman, who has a costume much like Batman, except an owl hood. Johnny Quick, not to be confused with a DC Golden Age character, is the Flash counterpart. And their universe is being overtaken by this antimatter. In the middle panel here, with all my powers, I can't save any of them. I feel so useless. The wall of antimatter dissolves all it touches, and then we go down in the bottom panels to Superwoman, who is destroyed. She's the Amazonian. You can see very kind of briefly under her thigh, attached to her hip, is a golden lasso. So those five characters were in the JLA 29 and 30, which was also reprinted in the 100-page super spectacular Justice League of America 114. They later appeared in Secret Society of Supervillains 13 and 14 in 1978, which kind of left in mid-story before the DC implosion. And then they came back in 1982 for a crossover with the Justice League, Justice Society, and All-Star Squadron. But to kind of go back to this character in the middle, and we can see in this final panel on page 5, Superwoman says, Luthor? This is Alexander Luthor, the Earth 3 version of Lex Luthor, who was introduced in DC Comics Presents Annual number 1, 1982, created by Marv Wolfman and Rich Buckler. And in that story, and we'll expound upon it as we go to this next panel, or this next page, where he retreats to his headquarters. The Luthors of Earth 1 and Earth 2, who we will see both of them later in the Crisis series, team up to fight the other Superman, the Superman and the other Luthor, and then eventually they go to Earth 3 with Ultraman as their protector. And they're foiled because since all of the counterparts of our superheroes are bad, the counterpart of the villain, Lex Luthor, is good. And he uses his science to become that Earth's only superhero, and he marries Lois Lane. So Alexander Luthor is the Earth 3 Luthor, marries Lois Lane, and you can see by now they have a child, Alexander Luthor Jr. And this little baby, as we go on to the next page, as Owlman and Johnny Quick are destroyed, and then in the middle panels as Pariah watches. First moment I learned about other Earths in multiple dimensions, I strove to find some way to bridge the vibrational gap which separates us. This is a prototype large enough for only one. No coincidence here. This is a repeat of the Superman origin. Pariah apologizes, that she will do constantly. He's been cursed with seeing Earth after Earth destroyed. We'll get into his origin story later on. Again, this is his first appearance. This is the first that any reader was seeing of him. And Ultraman flies into the void, and Power Ring's destroyed. The prototype that Luthor Jr. is in blasts off. Luthor and his Lois are consumed by the antimatter, and now we go on. So Earth 3 disappears, but now this we follow this trail from the end of Earth 3 to Earth 1 and the satellite headquarters of the Justice League of America. The JLA satellite, which was an entire era, the era I grew up on in reading Justice League, was introduced in Justice League of America 78 and was created by Denny O'Neil and Dick Dillon. And you can see the cover of that story has the Justice Leaguers leaving Earth. But it remained their headquarters until Justice League of America 229, 151 issues later, in August of 1984, where it was largely destroyed in a battle against the Martians, which was a story that returned John Jones to the Justice League. But Luthor didn't know that the headquarters has been abandoned, and it's just sitting there. So we have this abandoned Justice League. He felt he was sending his son to meet the superheroes. He had met Superman and the members of the Justice League of America, but DC continuity had other plans, and he's on this abandoned satellite. So it's in disrepair. It's been abandoned, and it was abandoned basically when Aquaman said, you know what? Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, you guys are all too busy for this. We're going to start the Justice League Detroit. We're going to have a headquarters in Detroit, and we're going to have Vibe and Gypsy and all that sort of stuff. And the Justice League Detroit era was in place. Prior to the satellite, the Justice League hung out in a cave. So, I mean, at least like the Justice Society back in the day had a brownstone, but whatever. We'll move on to page number 10. And it's page 10 and 11, this two-page splash with the credits of Wolfman and Perez, inked by Dick Giordano, and I'll talk about him a little bit later. Len Wein also had a hand in the script, and we see in the top middle panel this character we'll talk about in the middle later on. And July 1985, you know what to do and whom to summon. I do Monitor, so Monitor's main. We'll go into more detail on him when he's fully revealed at the end, although he already had his first appearance. But why not both Supermans and Wonder Womans? Why not the most powerful those we observed, right? You can't have every character jumping in right at the beginning. And I've analyzed all those with power in the past, present, and future, and our greatest hope lies with the so-called heroes and villains fighting alongside each other. Yet another alternative has been made available, one I could not expect it. So this character of Lila Michaels was first introduced in New Teen Titans Annual number 2 in September of 1983 by Wolfman and Perez, the same issue that was the first appearance of the Adrian Chase version of the Vigilante. And she's in this satellite working with the Monitor, and she undergoes this transformation here, and right at the end of page 12, she becomes Harbinger. And we can see, if you look closely, all these little kind of silhouettes blasting off from the central area, because we now have multiple Harbingers. But now already doubts begin to form. I see my own death as well as the death of worlds. So the Monitor's trying to do something. Now, I found this very odd at the time, that the first character that they recruit is Solivar, the king of Gorilla City. Gorilla City and Solivar both made the first appearances along with the Flash villain Gorilla Grodd in Flash number 106, May of 1959. So Solivar was created by John Broome and Carmine Infantino. And Gorilla Grodd was one of Flash's main enemies, a super intelligent gorilla with mind control powers. Gorilla City, and it says here at the bottom of the bottom left-hand panel, yet not the Africa known to men, but one unknown and hidden from sight. An Africa known only to very few, Gorilla City. So Gorilla City is this hidden city that Flash kind of stumbled across. Now, Solivar, in order to keep Gorilla City's existence hidden, ended up in the Central City Zoo, and Grodd figured out that he was there and wondering why he was there. Anyway, Solivar also has great powers, and usually when there's a Grodd story, Solivar was included as well. So, you know, this compassionate leader, this king of Gorilla City, Harbinger comes across. He's stunned by her appearance, and she takes him. And pattern's going to be repeated with other characters. Here, we're in the 30th century. Although, interestingly, here we see this character flying in. Her name is Dawnstar, and she is one of the Legion of Superheroes. Dawnstar was, her first appearance was in Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes 226 from April of 1977, created by Paul Levitz and Mike Grell. And her origin is that in the centuries, somewhere in the third millennia, between our time and the 1,000 years from now, that Native Americans colonized the planet of Starhaven. So obviously in dress and in appearance, Dawnstar does have a Native American influence. And so what it is she has this ability to fly through space, and she's also a tracker. She's a member of the Legion of Superheroes, which is a team that was first appeared in Adventure Comics 247 as part of a Superboy story in April of 1958. The first super team of the Silver Age, and essentially the Legion of Superheroes were these teenage superheroes from 1,000 years in the future. Superboy would travel 1,000 years in the future to have adventures with them. And by the time we get to 1985, the Legion is one of DC's top sellers. So Dawnstar is taken. Boom. Now we go to 1942 and Earth 2. And this is the setting of another title that was being published by DC at the time, All-Star Squadron. And we see this character of Danette Riley. Danette Riley made her first appearance of the All-Star Squadron in Justice League of America number 193 in August of 1981. And we can see from the bottom right panel on page 16 that she does have fire powers. And she says, wonder what she'd say if she knew rich society gal Danette Riley was also the flame-tossing superheroine called Firebrand. And we go to the next page. Harbinger shows up. I need you. Costume. Now, a lot more detail on Firebrand, right? She was a creation of Roy Thomas, Rich Buckler, and Jerry Ordway for All-Star Squadron. She was the sister of Rod Riley, the Golden Age Firebrand, who made his first appearance in Police Comics 1 in August of 1941, created by Jerry Iger and Reed Crandall, and was actually the cover feature in Police Comics number 1, a book that featured Plastic Man. He appeared in the first 13 issues of Police Comics, and then not again, really until Freedom Fighters number 11 in the 1970s. The Freedom Fighters were a group of superheroes that DC acquired from Quality Comics, and they were on Earth X, where the Nazis won the war. They did get their own title in the 1970s, and he was part of it. But in the All-Star Squadron storyline, Rod Riley is in the Navy when Pearl Harbor is attacked, and he's wounded. So he's out of commission. His sister Danette is a volcanologist studying volcanoes, and Per Degaton comes along, and Shining Knight, who she developed a romantic relationship with, is involved as well. And through, I think, magic from Wotan, one of the Spectre's villains, she acquires these fire powers. Her costume is very similar to her brother's, and she becomes one of the members of All-Star Squadron. I think, obviously, Roy Thomas wanted to balance out and have a few more female heroes than had existed in 1941. So she goes, and then we go to this bottom right 3-panel storyline. It's late night in the city, normally quiet, etc., etc. It doesn't indicate what Earth we're on, but we go here and bam, at the top of the page is the first appearance in DC Comics of Blue Beetle. Again, Blue Beetle had not appeared in DC Comics. There was a Golden Age Blue Beetle character who had his own book for many years in the 1940s, Dan Garrett. But this version of Blue Beetle was created by Steve Ditko. His first appearance was in Captain Atom number 83 by Charlton Comics in November of 1966. Also, Gary Friedrich did the script. He was involved in the creation. Blue Beetle did have his own 5-issue series for Charlton Comics before that was canceled. And then he did have brief reappearances in reprints by Charlton in their Modern Comics storyline. And I believe he was in Charlton Bullseye. But this is his first DC appearance. Now, the Charlton heroes were acquired by DC after Charlton was no longer publishing superheroes. They were still publishing other genres of books in 1983, but they were acquired by Paul Levitz for $5,000 as a gift to then DC, I think he was the vice president at the time, Dick Giordano. Now, Giordano was involved in Charlton Comics in the 60s. He was also an inker and inked much of the Neil Adams work in the Green Lantern, Green Arrow stories in the 1970s and inked this issue of Crisis on Infinite Earths. So kind of brings it full circle. And the characters, and I've said this before on the channel, this is, pretty widespread knowledge, but Alan Moore wanted to use the Charlton characters for a storyline he was developing, but DC wanted to have these characters to be ongoing characters and not be in a one-off story. So Moore changed the characters very slightly for the Watchmen miniseries that he did, and Blue Beetle became Night Owl. And if you just look at Blue Beetle's appearance, if you're familiar with the Watchmen storyline, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And so, the Charlton heroes, it turns out that they're on Earth 4, but that's not, and this kind of confused me at the time. That's not indicated here in his first appearance in DC Comics. And then we go on, and boom, we go to, he's recruited kind of willingly by Harbinger, and then we go to another Harbinger 45,000 years ago. The world was young. And we see that this Harbinger is attacked by something. And we get her with her eyes all blackened out, and something bad has happened. We see the shadow approaching her along like this iceberg. And then she's being observed. So we'll come back. Earth 2, the present. And we go to find this character in an insane asylum, Roger Hayden. Roger Hayden, the second Psycho-Pirate. The first Psycho-Pirate was Charles Halstead, who first appeared in All-Star Comics 23 in December of 1944, created by Gardner Fox and Joe Gallagher. He subsequently appeared in All-Star Comics number 32 to plague the Justice Society again. Charles Halstead had no superpowers, but he kind of manipulated emotions in order to commit crimes. And as was typical often back then, you had these in the All-Star Comics, the Justice Society stories, you would have these characters who would have gimmicks to link the individual stories together. But this version of Roger Hayden made his first appearance in Showcase Comics number 56, which was a team-up of Dr. Fate and Hourman. And he was created by Gardner Fox and Murphy Anderson for that storyline, and he has the powers to manipulate emotions, which we can see has driven him crazy. And he has this Medusa mask that Harbinger brings for him, and he becomes a critical part of the storyline. Now we go back to, once again, 45,000 years ago, and ancient Atlantis, and we see the character of Arion, who is a sorcerer, a high mage, and Lord of Atlantis. He made his first appearance in Warlord number 55 in a backup story, March 1982. He was created by Paul Kupperberg and Jan Duursema, and that backup ran from Warlord 55 through Warlord 62, and then he got his own 35-issue series, which was running at the time that Crisis on Infinite Earths came about. So obviously, DC was incorporating a lot of the characters that they were publishing at the time, while pulling characters from their past as well. And I mean their future. They're publishing past, but their continuity future. And this is ancient Atlantis, so there is a connection between Arion eventually and Aquaman, and his history has gotten kind of confused over the years. But at this point, basically he's this magical character, and I started buying a series when it came out, and I didn't realize that he had previously appeared in Warlord. I thought that his first appearance was in Arion number 1. Now we go to another character who's being published at the time, and we'll talk about actually 3 characters here, even though we only see 2. Earth 1, the present, Firestorm. Firestorm's first appearance was in his own self-titled series, Firestorm number 1, created by Jerry Conway and Al Milgrom. That book was published in March of 1978, and his solo series ran for 5 issues before running afoul of the DC implosion of 1978. He later on became a member of the Justice League, and then when Crisis came out, he was in the midst of his own 100-issue run. Firestorm was an amalgam of high school teenager Ronnie Raymond and nuclear physicist Martin Stein. There's a nuclear accident at a nuclear power plant, and the two are merged together and create this character Firestorm, who can manipulate non-living matter and change it. And he can, see also temperature. Now, one of his main antagonists was Killer Frost. The original Killer Frost was Crystal Frost, who made her first appearance in Firestorm number 3 in June of 1978, also created by Conway and Milgrom. However, the original Killer Frost, Crystal Frost, was killed in Firestorm number 21, and it was in that issue that her friend Louise Lincoln was introduced. Now, just a month before Crisis came out, and this is there were a lot of newly minted characters or newly changed character storylines that are included here. Louise Lincoln becomes the second Killer Frost in Firestorm number 34. April 1985. She was created by Jerry Conway and Raphael Kayanan. So here she appears as Firestorm's antagonist, and Psycho Pirate shows up and kind of changes that to love, and now she's in love with him, and Ronnie doesn't know how to react, and Harbinger recruits both of them. And you can see here at the top here of page 24 where Ronnie can change. He changes the icicles into flowers. Non-living matter. He can, or I guess, maybe they're, I think it was non-living matter he could change. Maybe, I don't know. Anyway, change them into flowers, something, maybe they're plastic flowers. I don't know. So now we move along and we see once again in the shadows the Monitor and his satellite. But now we get this double page spread, pages 26 and 27, and all the characters that we've been introduced to are part of this summoning, this team that's being put together, and there are a whole lot more. Up in the kind of the galleyways in this pink robe is the character Simon, who was introduced in New Teen Titans number 3, January of 1981, created by Wolfman and Perez. He was part of the Fearsome Five. He was a physicist who was changed by the Titans villain Trigon, and he had powers of telekinesis and telepathy. We see a close-up of him in the bottom right panel here. We go down below him. We see Geoforce and Cyborg having a conversation. They were in two of the more popular titles at the time. Geoforce was a member of the Outsiders, and his first appearance was in Brave and the Bold 200, along with the other Outsiders. That's from July of 1983. He was created by Mike W. Barr and Jim Aparo. That's also the first appearance of other members of the Outsiders, Halo and Katana. His sister Terra was a member / antagonist of the Teen Titans at the time, and he is the Prince of Markovia, who scientists experimented on him and his sister, and he has Earth control abilities, Geoforce, the force of geology, essentially. And right next to him is Cyborg, a member of the New Teen Titans, of course, created by Wolfman and Perez. First appearance in DC Comics Presents 26 in October of 1980. New Teen Titans was DC's most popular title at the time. Now we move to the right here, past Psycho Pirate, and we come to Superman. And this is the Earth 2 version of Superman, the original Superman. And you can kind of tell here in the bottom left-hand panel that he's the Earth 2 Superman because he has gray at the temples. He's a little bit older. His, obviously, first appearance was in Action Comics number 1 in June of 1938, created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. And he is the granddaddy of them all. And I think that's why they included him here, that they had to, you know, go back into history and use their first superhero, essentially. There are other characters that predate Superman, particularly Dr. Occult, also created by Siegel and Schuster, but he's the granddaddy of them all. And I had wondered at the time why Solivar was like the first recruit, and I think that's because Wolfman and Perez wanted to show that they were willing to throw in the kitchen sink and use anybody from any point in DC continuity, almost any character that you could think of. Now, the Earth 2 Superman did not appear in the early JLA, JSA crossovers. I think his first appearance was in Justice League of America 78, his first modern day appearance. And then he actually had his own, in an Action Comics, he marries Lois Lane, and then in Superman Family, they had their own backup story, the Superman Family, which kind of took place in, I think 1950s, as them as a married couple. And he did become a more prominent member of the Justice Society when they rebooted All-Star Comics, and then those stories eventually went over to the Adventure Comics dollar comic. And right next to Superman is Obsidian, who was a member of the Infinity Inc., which was another title that DC was publishing at the time. You see all the team titles they were publishing: Legion of Superheroes, Outsiders, New Teen Titans, Infinity Inc., All-Star Squadron, all represented here. Obsidian is the son of the Golden Age Green Lantern and the brother of Jade. They were twins. that were separated. His first appearance is in All-Star Squadron 25, along with the rest of Infinity Inc. in September of 1983, created by Roy Thomas and Jerry Ordway, and he has the ability to cast shadows that absorb light. And with his back to us is a member of the Green Lantern Corps. That is John Stewart, Green Lantern. His first appearance was in Green Lantern Volume 2, number 87, cover dated December 1971 / January 1972, created by Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams in that classic Green Lantern Green Arrow run. He appeared sporadically, but just months prior to this issue, in Green Lantern 185, cover dated February 1985, he succeeds Hal Jordan as the main Green Lantern. He was the third Green Lantern on Earth 1. He was actually the second, but he's considered the third after Hal Jordan and Guy Gardner, because Guy Gardner appeared in Green Lantern 59, and then he's also in 87. He's injured, so they need like a second backup. Fact of the matter is, Green Lantern 59 is an imaginary story. Like, what if Hal Jordan couldn't get it, and one of the Guardians shows him, like, well, this is what would have happened. It would have gone to this guy, but then he would have died, and since he didn't get the ring, he's still alive, and Hal's okay for that, and then somehow the history becomes that he was a Green Lantern. And the final new character we're meeting here in the bottom right of this very large splash panel is Dr. Polaris, a Green Lantern villain whose first appearance was in Green Lantern Volume 2, number 21, in June of 1963, 3 months before the appearance of Magneto in X-Men number 1 by Marvel Comics. So Dr. Polaris is like this first magnetic villain, although he comes after Cosmic Boy and the Legion of Superheroes, but that's beside the point. He was created by John Broome and Gil Kane, and he's this scientist who has developed these magnetic powers. And so you can see we have a couple of villains here: Simon, Psycho Pirate, and Dr. Polaris, and Killer Frost, and a bunch of heroes, and then kind of Solovar in the mix as well. So we see these shadow demons. Simon senses danger, and the shadow demons attack this band of heroes. And there's a fight ensues to kind of carry us to the end of the story. And, you know, everybody's a little confused as to what's going on. Where are we? Why are they attacking us? Blinding light. And then we see this hand at the bottom of page 31. And then we are introduced to the Monitor. The key player in this storyline, the guy who's kind of put this team together to try to stem off the destruction of all reality. This is the Monitor, Marv Novu. His first cameo appearance was in New Teen Titans number 21, where we see him discussing the powers with Lila Michaels of the characters he's trying to collect. And that's way back in 1982. And his first full appearance, where we see him in full, was oddly in G.I. Combat 274, February of 1985, where he's in a haunted tank story of all things. But he was created by Wolfman and Perez, and this is where we leave off the first issue. So just to kind of summarize, we've introduced all of these characters, and there's only a handful of new characters, but there's a lot of background for each of these, and each of these characters have connections through team affiliations. And if I'm just going to go back a few pages to where we see all of them, we have Blue Beetle from Earth 4, Charlton characters, Dawnstar from the Legion of Superheroes, Geoforce from the Outsiders, Cyborg from the New Teen Titans, Superman who's in the Justice Society, Obsidian Infinity Inc., Firebrand All-Star Squadron, John Stewart is a member of the Green Lantern Corps, Firestorm, who had been a member of the Justice League. Justice League now in their Justice League Detroit days, and I guess Wolfman and Perez were like, we're not even going to bother with those guys yet. So that is a little synopsis on Crisis on Infinite Earths number 1. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you got some information out of it, and you know, enhances your reading to understand who these characters were and where they came from. Join us back here next time, as I'm going to dive into issue number 2. And until then, maybe get a primer, read issue number 2, read issues number 1 and 2. They are available on the, what do we call it? The DC Universe Infinite app/website. You can read all of the Christ on Infinite Earths digitally. It is a subscription-based thing, but, you know, if you get, you can get a trade paperback of this. And I think if you're interested in all in DC Comics and DC Comics history and maybe what James Gunn has coming up to understand, because James Gunn, same age as I am, he would have been reading this in college as well. And obviously has an appreciation for the history of DC Comics. But this isn't about movie speculation or anything else. It is about the history of DC Comics, this story, and where all these characters come together. So we're going to get more characters in issue number 2, and we're going to get a lot more characters as we go through the 12 issues of this series. We've only scratched the surface of DC Comics history. But thanks for stopping by, and until next time, this is Jim saying, enjoy your comics.